Welcome, everyone. Today I have with me Pam Blanton, the founder and CEO of Partners for Housing. And Partners for Housing has a really incredible mission, and I regret it taking this long to get them on the podcast, candidly, but that's on me. So, their mission is to empower families to create housing solutions that meet the unique needs of their loved ones with a disability. And I'm really excited to dive into this with Pam and have her explain what they do, how they do it. They're based in Washington, but as you're going to listen and learn from Pam, they don't only work with families in Washington. So, with that introduction, Pam, thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for inviting me.
So I guess where we could start is how did Partners for Housing come about? And what's, I've read what your mission is, and that's a pretty big mission. But how did it come about?
Well, going back to the start, I was working in county government in the housing finance program. And at that time, our director wanted somebody to focus on each social service system. So I raised my hand for developmental disabilities because I have a very dear friend who had twin girls that had developmental disabilities, and we raised our kids together. And I was always wondering where are Annie and Lily going to live. And so as I started getting into the world of disability, I saw a lot of opportunities for improvement and greater access for families. So I started running over to the developmental disabilities division saying, hey, you guys should just do this. You should just do that. And they're like, okay. So they started implementing these new things. And finally she said, Pam, you should come work for us. We're going to create this housing coordinator position. And so I went to work for the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and families were asking for roommate matching. They just kept calling and saying, if we can find compatible roommates, we can figure this housing thing out on our own. This was like the early 2000s. So I'm like, well, where is the match.com for families with disabilities? And I looked at a number of nonprofits that served our area and tried to get them to take on this roommate matching. And ultimately, I was starting to feel stifled by the bureaucracy, and I decided to leave and started Partners for Housing as a roommate matching opportunity. So I worked with a family therapist to develop this assessment to kind of get at roommate matching. And then when we started selling that tool in 2013, I recognized how many families didn't have the benefits they were entitled to. So we tweaked it to include the benefit questions so we could help families prepare where their loved one is living at home. So in a nutshell, I started with the idea of the matching pool, and ultimately we've created this benefits and housing review. We also still have our roommate matching pool. We have about 250 people in there right now, primarily the state of Washington, but we're expanding. We also have people in there from Arizona, New York, Georgia, Michigan, Colorado, I believe. Anyway, so we're expanding that. And then, when families find their roommates, we help them set up a shared living home. And to date, we've done 66 shared living homes serving 132 people with disabilities.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit more about what a shared living home is?
Yeah, I can. So, shared living is a family driven housing solution. So, we help families get the benefits that they're entitled to and understand which ones are helpful to create housing solutions. We help them find compatible roommates and families that share vision and values so they can partner and work together to set up a shared living home. So, in a shared living home, the families work together. They Families really like it because it gives them choice and control over location and caregivers and roommates and choice. So it's just like anybody else that's going to rent or from on the private market. They happen to be people with disabilities that might need some support, and um, so that's what shared living is. It's an alternative to the group home and other models offered by the state.
Yeah, and what stands out to me is my son is And we were talking a little bit before we hit record. So my son is in his own apartment, paid for by the Medicaid waiver in Maryland. And he has one, one-to-one staff. And he wouldn't want roommates. That's just not him. But I'm thinking like a lot of families, more and more that I'm talking to, they're very interested in the self-direction or whatever the word is in your state where you have a budget given to you by your state Medicaid agency and you are in charge of hiring your own staff. And that could be a really great way. Many of them, their children are growing into young adults and they don't want to live with mom and dad anymore. They want their own independence. They want friends. And I could see this working very well, especially for those families that are doing self-directed, because then they don't have that. Not that it won't work with an agency, especially if you're not getting residential from the agency, but I just see self-directed being even better because you self-directed, you have everything under your control. Or if you're not on a Medicaid waiver at all, because maybe you don't qualify or what have you, this could still work, right? I mean, you don't only do this for people that are on Medicaid waivers.
Most of the shared living homes we have set up, the people have Medicaid waivers and they get
Okay,
personal care hours through that
got it.
Medicaid waiver. Washington is not a self-direction state.
Okay.
And so New York is, and we've done some work in New York. But I always try to stay in my lane where my expertise is. And so when we're talking about benefits, and like you said earlier, we can serve people in any state. But when we're talking about benefits, the state Medicaid services are very different, can be very different in every state. And I know Washington State, but when we go to another state, we're looking at we help them find somebody there that can help them with the rules around their particular Medicaid program. There's other federal benefits we can talk to people about, like Section 8, food benefits or state benefits, Social Security, making sure everybody has what they need there. But yeah, uh, shared living, if you have self-direction, I imagine it could work. It has worked for some families in New York. But yeah, whether you have a Medicaid waiver or whether there's some private pay happening, or, sometimes it's just the benefit of the Section 8 housing subsidy that will pay the rent for a living caregiver. And sometimes people just need very little support, but in exchange for free rent, they get that support from somebody who might live in and have another job, right? So we just help families tailor it to their own situation, to their loved ones who are going to be living in the home.
That's awesome. And what's that experience like? Is it a one meeting, one and done meeting? Is it a kind of a series of meetings where you really get to know people or
Yeah, so our benefits and housing review, um, when families can go to our website, they can purchase the benefits and housing review. In the state of Washington, we received a large grant, and so we're able to offer those to free for
wow.
families, which we'd love to do in other states. It's a great way to build your roommate pool quickly and have families access that service. So they go online, they purchase the residential assessment, then they immediately get access to that assessment. They complete it. As soon as they submit it, we follow up, you know, within 3 days, usually quicker than that, and schedule a follow-up consultation. And then we meet with them to talk about their vision. We have an hour meeting via Zoom. We talk about benefits and different housing options and really get at what they want to do. And then when we're done with that meeting, we send them an email with a list of steps, actionable steps that they can take to help move forward. We invite them to our roommate matching pool if that's what they want and if they're a good fit. And then that sort of ends that service. If people have questions, little questions all along, of course, we will answer questions. But some families then you want to purchase some consulting hours to help further understand options or next steps. When somebody is in our pool and they find a group of families and they want to work together to create a solution, that's a different set of services called shared living development. And all of our fees are on our website. So we're really transparent with that. But typically that's a process that takes about a year.
Okay.
And it's a flat fee. We usually work with the families. It depends on where they are in the process, but typically, we'll meet once a month. So when it comes to shared living development, we have developed all of the agreements and we lead families through a process. So we
That's
don't hire
huge.
caregivers, we don't go find the house, but we say, okay, we have caregiver agreements. Here's how you put together a compensation package. We help with household budgets so they can start thinking about how that all lies out. We have parent commitment agreements. We help with the whole Section 8 process. And then once everybody moves in, we have a facilitated review process so we can make sure that the home launches in a really healthy way with the caregivers and the families. Yeah, and then we're out, and the caregiver would then be the living caregiver would then be managing the day to day, and the parents provide the oversight. And then as things evolve, like they always do, families can come back to us and say, hey, a roommate left, we want to onboard another roommate. So we turn their profile back on in our pool. We have another caregiver, we'd like you to help us onboard them. And we want to do the facilitated review again so they can purchase consulting hours to do that.
Yeah, and so the individuals and the families and parents out there who have tried to do this on their own, they understand just how much you're taking off their plate. I mean, just how much of a load you're lifting off of them. For those of you that haven't tried this yet, I have got to tell you what Pam has put together and built is going to save you years of effort and research. And in my opinion, it is worth every penny because it just anytime somebody can say, here's what you have to do, here's how you do it. Oh, by the way, we've got all the templates for you. That is, they've done all the, I mean, Pam, you and your team have done all the heavy lifting. That's not fair. I mean, when a family goes to implement this, there's a lot of heavy lifting as well. But
Absolutely.
it's you've cut through all the stuff, so you don't have to figure out. You're not trying to bring two people together or maybe three people together into a house and figure all that out while in match personalities while trying to figure out what documents you have to have in place. It really lets you focus on okay, let's make sure we're getting the right personality. And anytime you bring two people into a household, there's going to be friction. Any married couples out there know that, right?
Yep. 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 And between parents. And so you want to make sure you have the parents share vision and values and yeah. And the other thing related to that, Eric, is that, a lot of people are dealing with Social Security benefits and Medicaid funded services and Section 8. And there's places where you can go wrong and you want to
Oh
make
yeah.
sure you avoid those pitfalls. A lot of times families are needing to private pay in order a piece of depending on the services a person has from the state. And so you have to know that you can't private pay for a Medicaid funded service because that's a violation of Medicaid rules. So we help families understand where those gotchas can be, so that they can set it up and not get in trouble, and then they'll have the documents to back them up.
Yeah, I mean, I've always considered myself to be an expert with Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and Medicaid waivers. But Section 8 and other housing programs, I've read the manuals, but I am, I may be one step above the person who hasn't read it. And so to have a resource like your group is huge. Can you talk a little bit about Section 8? I mean, we've talked, you've mentioned it a few times. I think it's another awesome program that I don't think gets enough visibility. Caveat, there's a lot of, it's not something you can just jump into.
Right. And so, it's Section 8 is a big mystery to families. And the biggest thing is, getting on Section 8 wait lists. And if you're waiting for your local housing authority to open their wait list, maybe it's been 3, 4, 5 years, maybe the wait list is 10 years long, right? But the reality is, if you're a person, anybody, you can put your name on as many lists across the nation as you want. Anybody can do that. Typically, if you get a voucher in a particular jurisdiction, you have to live in that jurisdiction for 1 year. But there's this thing called reasonable accommodation that you can ask for if you're a person with disabilities. So you can get a voucher from another jurisdiction and request reasonable accommodation to port that voucher to a housing authority near you.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's that makes it possible to get on lists. And we show families how to do that. There's a great website out there. It's called affordablehousingonline.com. Fabulous. Every week they list the housing authority wait lists that are open across the nation. And so we have developed a PDF that we share with families who go through our benefits and housing review process to help them navigate that website. And we encourage them to spend 30 minutes a week putting their loved one's name on lists. So that they can get access to that program. You have to be kind of ready, because once you get a voucher, you have to put it in place within a certain amount of time or it will expire. But, so that's one thing that makes Section 8 more, a possibility for people with disabilities getting on other lists. The other great things about Section 8 is if you're a person with a disability and you need a living caregiver, you can request reasonable accommodation for a living caregiver, and the housing authority will pay the rent for that caregiver.
Oh, wow.
So that allows you to start to put together a nice compensation package for a living caregiver.
And that won't run afoul of Medicaid paying the salary, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. This is huge. And so people understand Section 8 doesn't cover 100% of the rent, though, correct?
Yeah. So with Section 8, by the way, is a federal program. The money comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, and it's administered by local housing authorities. So when a person has a voucher, they pay about 30% of their income toward rent, and then the housing authority pays the rest up to a limit based on the fair market rents in the jurisdiction where they're living. And so it's people do contribute toward rent and utilities. Somebody on SSI is going to pay, $280 around there for toward rent and utilities, but then they can rent something that's maybe, depending on your jurisdiction, $1,500, right? And the housing authority will make the rest of that payment.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah, it makes a lot of things possible, because really, when you're thinking about housing for people who need support, you really need to think about it. I mean, if you're going to set it up on your own, you need to really think about two sort of buckets. You have your bricks and mortar, how are we going to pay the rent and afford that? And then you need to think about your services and how you're going to pay for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and for some families, there could be a period of time where services may be covered, but the rent won't be, right? And that voucher makes housing much more accessible.
Right, right. Another thing you can do with a voucher for the families who have the means is typically with Section 8, you can't rent from a relative, but if you're a person with disabilities, you can request reasonable accommodation to rent from a relative. So we've worked with families who have accessed, there's a special Fannie Mae program out there for parents who want to purchase for a son or daughter with a disability. They get that loan, and their son or daughter gets Section 8, and the Section 8, with some down, depending on your geographical area, can make their mortgage payment. And then they have a nice little asset in long-term stable housing for the
Wow.
bricks and mortar side. So there's some creative things like that families have come up with.
I'm gonna have to look into that Fannie Mae program because I wasn't aware of that either.
Yeah, it's called the Fannie Mae Family Opportunity Mortgage. Any mortgage rep has access to this program, but a lot of them don't know about it. And so, uh, we have somebody that we refer people to if you want to learn more about that program.
That's
Just a
incredible.
mortgage rep my husband and I used a few times, whose son is on the autism spectrum, and he's helped a lot of our families. And he loves to do it, whether they choose him or their cousin who's a mortgage rep to use the program. He likes to just, it's his way of giving back. So,
No, that's incredible. I mean, I've been doing this for years. I've never heard of that. So it just goes to show you, if you don't even know what questions to ask, you could be missing out on so much, right? I mean, um,
and so that's what people say, families say about our benefits and housing review. Sometimes they just say, wow, the questions themselves got me thinking about things I'd never thought about. And I've always been a collector of questions. And, I've been in the space for a long time, used to facilitate family networking groups for the county. And I've always had somebody in there writing down every single question. And so those questions are that knowledge is reflected in our benefits and housing review. And yeah, how do you know what to ask if you don't know?
yeah, and I wrote down some of the most common concerns I think you guys come across. And the three I wrote down are, what does my family member need to live outside of my home? Who will my family members live with, and how will we afford it? And I got to tell you, Pam, I know people have asked me those questions, and I've been doing the consulting side of it for probably 12 years, and I've been hearing those questions since day one.
Right, right. Yeah. And so, we try to answer those questions with our process, right? So our benefits and housing review get you thinking of what your family member might need. A roommate pool helps you find out who they're going to live with. And always sharing the costs with other families helps make things affordable.
Yeah.
So, if there's some out of pocket, if you're dividing it with two other families for either the bricks and mortar or the services, it just all becomes more affordable and sustainable.
Yeah. I agree. When should families reach out to you? I mean, are you somebody that you should wait till the child is 22, 23 and get in out of high school and ready to launch, or do you think um hey, maybe approach when you're starting all your other transition planning at 14, 15? What do you think about that?
So with our state grant, Washington state grant that we have, we are reaching out to families whose loved ones are 16 and older. Some people say, we need you in there earlier. You really can't. What we really do is help families transition from the child to the adult service system.
Hmm.
And so that's when you might be thinking about guardianship, or supported decision making. You're going to be applying for SSI benefits and Medicaid. If you're not yet have not yet applied for state services, you're going to be doing that. Um, so really, 18, if we get you before 18, we can say, hey, do this and this when you apply for Social Security, and you'll have less opportunities for delay, right? If you know what you need to do, like charging rent, right? Some things you need to do to get the full amount of the SSI benefit. Um, so, but a lot of families are planners and they want to know ahead of time, what are the housing options going to be when my loved one turns
Hmm.
18? And they want to start thinking about that at 16 or 15. So really the practical 1, 2, 3 of it happens at, starting at 18 or 17 and a half sometimes for guardianship, if that's what people are going at. So it's ready when they turn 18. But for the planners, it's just nice to know ahead of time because it's always in parents' minds. And so what happens when you start getting those questions answered, it frees your mind to come up with other questions and vision and dream big about what's possible instead of being fearful about what's out there, right?
Yeah, I can attest to that. I think most listeners know I was going through a time where I was trying to get my son into an apartment, and it was taking all my brain space. I mean, it was hard for me to work. It was hard for me to focus. I was short-tempered. Not something I'm proud of, but it is what it is. And it ended up where I had to get state legislators and stuff involved to get the waiver program moving. I mean, all that to say, that's just one thing. Trying to get him into an apartment for a waiver that he qualified for. So when you add all these other things that families have, thinking about guardianship, it takes a lot of brain space. So if
Yeah,
you can say, okay, I talked to Pam, this is my checklist for when we're ready to move forward. I don't have to think about it anymore. You can take that out of your brain.
yep, yep, exactly. And it gives you space to vision and dream big,
Yeah.
right? Really, like, okay, I know the three or four options that are housing options that are available. I know that shared living is what I want to do. So what will that look like for him?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and there's also these families out there, and I know you're out there because you've talked to me, who have said, Eric, we really want to work with another family and or two other families and go in and get a house. How would we do that? Well, you would call Pam at Partners for Housing, or you would call Partners for Housing and do a consult because they can help you with all that.
And so I'll just correct that a
Sorry.
bit. Um, so we've never had families purchase together. We usually it's one family will purchase and the others will rent
Yeah, that's a
from.
lot cleaner. That's a
It's
lot
a lot
cleaner.
cleaner.
Yeah.
So if not that we wouldn't work with families, but I wouldn't that wanted to do a joint purchase, but I
Yeah.
would be staying in my lane and referring them to an attorney for that. Um,
No,
and I
and you're
think
right that I personally would never encourage somebody to go halvesies or
what
in
happens, and I've seen this, what happens is you have three families that purchase together for their kids that at that point in their life, it's a perfect solution. And so, but then as people age, all of our needs change. And if somebody's needs raise to a point where they need a higher level of care and their needs can no longer be met in that situation, then you're looking for another family who can come in, who has the money to purchase into something like that, who is compatible roommate, the family share vision and values. It's in this particular jurisdiction that you want it to be. We're near family, right? And so ultimately, what happens is they end up selling it and kind of starting over. If one family purchases, it's a lot easier to have somebody else come in and out.
yeah. Yeah, and then you're not worrying about who's responsible for capital expenditures like a roof or a
Right.
furnace or little repairs like a handyman or an electrician or a plumber.
Yeah.
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 No, that's
And
awesome.
sometimes like I said, sometimes one family is purchasing, but in order to make it viable, they need some contribution from the other families to cover those things like mortgage, taxes, insurance, reserves. And
Yeah.
so, they can have the other families contribute some to an account, to a rainy day fund, some of our
Yeah.
families call it, so that when they need to replace the furnace, there's the money there to do it.
Yeah.
And we
And
help, that's part of shared living development that we talk about. Okay, what are your real costs, landlord? And how can we divide that by three to help you, minus the rent and the other things to make it a viable option?
yeah, and I've talked to people when I was a financial planner, I've talked about that, about having your the rent you collect maybe $3,000 a month, but that doesn't mean that's $3,000 in your pocket. You should be setting some of that money aside for repairs. You
Yep.
should be setting some of that money aside for vacancies. Maybe that wouldn't be as big of a deal with the shared living development program. But I'm a big believer in making sure you have buckets.
Yeah. And it is a big deal because people do move on. Right. I mean, it's reality. It's not unusual for a roommate to move on for whatever reason. And part of our shared living development agreements is a parent agreement where they agree to give at least 120 days notice if they're leaving. So the other families have time to find a replacement roommate and that those costs are covered for that 120 days. So yeah, we,
And
we build all that in.
and that right there, Pam, is an example of something I bet most people would never have thought of. I
Right.
guarantee it. Or if they did, they might put a 30-day window in, and 30
Yeah,
days just isn't
it's
enough.
not enough. Right. Right.
See, this is just further proof. I mean, there's so much you guys have done and put all the hard work into. Um, it's incredible. I I really think uh, I really think you're an underutilized resource, and I want to reiterate, you are in Washington State, and for people in Washington State, the Benefits and Housing Review is free. So if you live in Washington State and you haven't talked to Partners for Housing yet, and you have an individual with a disability older than the age of 17, what are you waiting for?
Older than 16.
16,
And
sorry.
this grant is good until July of 2025, and then the funding ends.
They need to hurry up.
Yeah, so that's what we're saying. Limited time, grab it while you can, right?
Yeah. And then even if you don't live in Washington State, the Benefits and Housing Review is a huge. You're not going to find your attorney's not. Eric is saying this, not Pam. In Eric's experience, your special needs planning attorney who's doing your estate and your will, and they're not going to be able to help you with the Benefits and Housing Review. They'll tell you this is what you may be eligible for, Medicaid, SSI, but it's not the same thing. Your financial planner, um, in rare cases, may be able to, but that's not what a financial planner is learning. Financial planners are learning how to plan for retirement and college funding, and you want them to be good at that. That's why they're your financial planner. Partners for Housing is housing. You Pam said it earlier. She stays in her lane. Her lane is housing.
Right. And benefits, right?
And
Benefits and
benefits and
housing. Yeah,
benefits.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and then the roommate matching pool they can do in any state.
Yeah. And
Obviously,
so it becomes more valuable when there's more people in the pool, right? And so
right. That's where
working
you
with,
start talking to your other parents and getting other parents involved, and because you may sign up and maybe you're the only person in Utah until you get more people. So obviously, the more people that know about it, the more people that participate, the better. It's like Match.com, right? If there's not a lot of if you're the only guy or woman in Idaho on Match.com looking for somebody in your region, you're probably out of luck. But the more people that join, the more options you have. Maybe that's not the best
and
choice,
it's
Pam,
really
but
the warrior parents, those warrior parents who are finding us and bringing us to other states, like Georgia, for instance. I mean, we met a warrior mom and dad from Georgia, and they've because of them, we've got more people in our pool from Georgia, and we work with people because we want to expand into other states. We just need to have the right partners to do that. Um, and the other thing I'll say is we do webinars every other month, and they're on our website. And you can sign up for those. Whenever we do a webinar, we offer $100 off of the Benefits and Housing Review. So for
oh
people who
wow,
attend there, they can get a discount on that. And the
wow.
Benefits and Housing Review is $500. So that $100 off can help families.
And for those of you that are listening, this would be a qualified disability expense. You could pay for it using your child's ABLE account or your ABLE account. You could use it for the trust. Your trustee could pay for this. Both of those um, are qualified expenses allowable by the trust, especially as trust, or allowable by an ABLE account. So that's an option. If you need to know that, that is an option. Um, the have you and this is you know something that just came to my mind. Um, have you worked with agencies that run group homes to see if you could help them with their roommates, or have they ever come to you?
Yeah, they have come to us, and we've had discussion around that. But we're not there yet.
Okay.
So right now, our roommate matching pool is families reaching out to other families.
Yeah.
We've had a number of people saying, "Wow, if we agencies saying if we could have some help with the roommate matching, that would because that's a big deal. If you don't have a good match, and if it if it doesn't work out, then starting all over is expensive for everybody.
Hmm.
And it's traumatic for a person with a disability to have to move. So we're not there yet, but we're open to the idea, and we've had conversations around it with agencies.
Yeah, and agencies are they've been doing things for a long time, so there's a lot more bureaucracy than when a family says, "Hey, this is what we want to do," and
Right,
they're
right.
more fluid.
Yep.
Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? I've got like 2 pages of notes, but I want to make sure we cover everything. Is there something I should have asked that I didn't?
Well, that's a good question. I think you asked a lot of good questions. I mean, um, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. Um,
So where can people find you? How do they, are you on all the social medias?
Yep, we're on all the social. So I'm on LinkedIn and we have Facebook and Instagram. Um, you can find out all of our handles by looking at our website, partners4housing.com. It's a number four. Um, Lots of information on our website, articles that we've written, um, our webinars, shared living, our services. We have a great video with some homes that we've created. It's a great little video that's on our website as well.
I'll include a link to the video in the show notes too.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to see that. It's pretty incredible.
And for people who are in a state outside of Washington, like I said, if you want us in your state, reach out. We can talk about how we can make that happen because
Yeah.
that's what we need. We need someone to say, "Hey, we want this," and then we can work together on bringing it to your state.
And for listeners of this podcast, I think by now you'd have picked up on the theme that you're hearing this an awful lot. It's up to you, the families, to tell the states and to bring these organizations into the states because these organizations want to support you, but they have to know that the need and the desire to be supported is there. So please reach out.
And we've been doing this for a while, and we've also gone to states too, because it's really awesome when you can get funding to provide the service for free so that it's affordable for everybody. But it can be very difficult and time consuming to negotiate contracts with states. And really what we've learned is when families want it, it's the warrior families that make things happen. And it always has been that way from school to housing to services. It's always the warrior parents that make it happen.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, Pam. So again, it's the website is partners, the number four housing.com. And there'll be a link to that in the show notes. There's gonna be a link to the video in the show notes. In my personal opinion, I think everybody would do to go ahead and get their benefits and housing review done, whether you live in the state of Washington or not, because that $500 is going to pay dividends once you get everything outlined for you and you have a better idea of, okay, this is what I'm missing. This is what I should be asking for. It's huge. It's really huge.
And I did think of something else, Eric, that families think. A lot of times they think, okay, we're going to finish school transition program, and then 22, we're going to get a job and we're going to work for a while. And we'll start thinking about housing at, 25 or 30. I would say the biggest advice that I would give families is to start early because there's steps you can take at home to prepare. And when families say to us, how long does it take to set up a shared, to go through this process and end up with a shared living home? I would say 2 to 5 years. So we
Yeah.
don't work with people when
Yeah.
they're in crisis. It's a planning process and it can happen faster than that. But you know, really taking the time to step through all the benefits, making sure you have the right partners, going through the process of setting up shared living home. It can take 2 to 5 years. So
Yeah.
start early. That's the biggest advice I would give.
Yeah, and that's not something you want to rush anyway. You really
Right.
don't.
Yeah. you can't think that way really through all the pieces. So
No, this is awesome, Pam. Thank you again for doing this. I'm really, really glad I finally got you on. And again, it was on me. It took me forever to get you on here. So, but I'm really glad we got to connect.
thank you, Eric. And it's been fun. I appreciate you and the work you do as well, which is incredible, the work that you've been doing as well. So,
Thanks.
I mean, it's nobody, no one person knows everything. That's why we have our name Partners for Housing is intentional, right? Nobody can know everything. It takes shared minds to make things happen.
Exactly. And that's a perfect way to end the episode.
Thank you.